My name is Ellie, and I'm 22. The text message came through just as I was adjusting my cap before walking across that stage. Decided to go to Tommy's game. Graduations are boring. You can handle this yourself. Mom. I stared at my phone while hundreds of other families cheered around me. 5 years of working 3 jobs, living on ramen, and somehow maintaining a 3.8 GPA. And not one member of my family bothered to show up. I tucked my phone away, walked across that stage alone, and made a decision that would change everything. They wanted me to handle it myself? Fine. I'd handle everything myself from now on. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was graduating with a degree in business administration while my family was watching my 19-year-old brother throw a ball around. Tommy was apparently more important than my college graduation. But then again, when wasn't he more important? I'd learned to expect this level of disappointment from them. But somehow this felt different. This was supposed to be my day. One day. Just one. I collected my diploma with a smile plastered on my face, shook hands with the dean, and posed for the photographer like I had somewhere to be afterward, like someone was waiting for me. The families around me erupted in cheers and applause, phones recording every moment, flowers being thrown. I got polite clapping from strangers who felt bad for the girl walking alone. How generous of them. After the ceremony, I sat in my dented Honda Civic in the parking lot, still wearing my cap and gown, watching families celebrate together. The Andersons were taking pictures by the fountain. The Chen family had balloons and a whole entourage. Even weird Kevin from my statistics class had his grandmother there, crying tears of joy. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I took a selfie. Just me, in my graduation cap with the biggest fake smile I could manage. I posted it with the caption, "Did it," and waited. 15 minutes later, I had likes from classmates and professors. Nothing from my family, not even my dad. Shocking, right? That's when I realized something that probably should have occurred to me years ago. I didn't actually need them. I'd gotten through college without their help, worked every job from babysitting to waitressing to pay my own way, and somehow convinced myself that their approval would make it all worthwhile. But sitting there in that parking lot, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. I drove home to our cramped 2-story house where I'd grown up being the responsible one, the invisible one, the one who figured things out. I could hear the celebration before I even opened the front door. Tommy had apparently made some spectacular play that required cake, and probably presents too. Because that's what we did in the Patterson family. We celebrated Tommy. Must be nice to be the golden child. How was the thing? Mom asked when I walked into the kitchen, not even looking up from cutting cake. The thing? I repeated. Your graduation thing. I stood there for a moment, still in my cap and gown, diploma in hand. Oh, boring, just like you said. Dad wandered in with Tommy, both still in their Phillies gear. Hey kiddo, how'd it go? Fine. I was getting good at one-word answers. Tommy, to his credit, at least acknowledged what had happened. Congrats, sis. Sorry we missed it, but I had scouts there today. Coach said it was the most important game of the season. I nodded like this made perfect sense. Like my college graduation should obviously take a back seat to a college baseball game. Of course it was. Don't be dramatic, Ellie. Mom sighed. You'll have other graduations. Other graduations. Sure, Mom. I'll just collect degrees like baseball cards. That night I sat in my room, and I used the term my room loosely since it had been converted into a storage space years ago, and made a list. A list of every birthday they'd forgotten, every achievement they'd missed, every time I'd been overlooked for something Tommy needed. It was longer than I expected. At the bottom of the page, I wrote, Ellie Patterson died today. Looking back, I probably should have seen this coming when I turned 8 and they forgot to buy me a birthday present. Not forgot my birthday entirely, that would come later, just forgot the present part. Mom handed me a $20 bill the next day and said, pick something out for yourself, sweetie. Even at 8, I knew that wasn't how birthdays worked in other families. But hey, at least I learned early how to shop for myself. The invisibility started early. I was 3 when Tommy was born, and suddenly I became the big sister who could help mommy and daddy. Help turned into responsibility, which turned into expectation, which eventually turned into being completely overlooked because I was so good at taking care of herself. When I was 10, I organized my own birthday party, sent out invitations, bought decorations with my allowance money, and made my own cake because Mom was dealing with Tommy's little league schedule. 5 kids showed up. It was actually fun, but I remember thinking it was weird that I had to plan my own party. Most kids get their parents to do that. Silly me, expecting parental involvement. By middle school, I'd perfected the art of being invisible. Not in a pathetic way, more like a survival mechanism. I got good grades, never caused problems, and somehow convinced myself that if I just did everything right, they'd eventually notice. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The Christmas I turned 14, I found all the presents under the tree labeled with names. Tommy had a pile that could have stocked a small store. Mom and Dad had gifts for each other. There was even a present for our dog, Buddy. My name appeared exactly once on a gift card to Target. Not even wrapped. Just the card in an envelope. "We thought you'd prefer to pick your own stuff," Dad explained when he saw me staring at the gift card. "Teenagers are so particular these days." I smiled and thanked them because that's what good daughters do. But I also started babysitting that week. Not for extra money, for escape. Other families actually talked to each other during dinner. Wild concept, I know. High school was when I really hit my stride as the family ghost. I joined student council, made honor roll every semester, and got a part-time job at Miller's Diner downtown. I was saving for college because I'd figured out early that no one else was planning to pay for it. Mom mentioned once that they'd help where they could, but somehow Tommy's travel baseball expenses always seemed more urgent than my college fund. Amazing how priorities work. Junior year, I was nominated for homecoming court. I came home excited to tell them, but they were deep in crisis mode because Tommy had gotten detention for skipping class. The homecoming thing got lost in the drama of whether this would affect his baseball eligibility. I went to the dance with friends and didn't mention it again. Why bother competing with the Tommy show? The pattern was so ingrained that I stopped noticing it. Tommy's needs came first. Always. His schedule determined family dinners. His games determined weekend plans. His college visits meant family road trips while I researched schools online in my converted storage room. When I got my acceptance letter to State University, I left it on the kitchen counter where everyone would see it. It sat there for 3 days before Mom noticed. "Oh, honey, that's nice. Did you figure out the money situation?" I had. Because of course I had. I'd applied for every scholarship I could find, taken out student loans, and planned to work through college. The same way I'd figured out everything else. "Yeah, I've got it handled." "Great. You're so good at taking care of yourself." That phrase. If I had $1 for every time I heard, "You're so good at taking care of yourself," I could have paid for college in cash. It was their excuse for everything. Why they forgot my birthday, missed my school events, and never asked about my plans. Because I was so good at taking care of myself. Convenient how that worked out for them. The worst part wasn't the neglect. It was watching how differently they treated Tommy. When he struggled with algebra, they hired a tutor. When I struggled with calculus, I figured it out myself. When he wanted new cleats, they appeared like magic. When I needed interview clothes for my first job, I saved up and bought them myself. I learned to celebrate my own achievements, comfort myself when things went wrong, and make my own decisions about everything from what classes to take to what college to attend. I became completely self-sufficient out of necessity, and they praised me for it like it was a choice. The only person who ever really saw me was Grandma Morgan, my mom's mother. She'd passed away when I was 16, but I still remembered how she'd always ask about my day, remember my favorite foods, and never miss sending a birthday card. She used to say I had her eyes and her determination. "You're going to do something special, Ellie Morgan," she'd tell me. Mark my words. By senior year, I was basically a friendly boarder who happened to share their last name. I ate dinner with them when our schedules aligned, contributed to conversations when asked direct questions, and otherwise lived parallel to their lives rather than as part of them. The night before I left for college, Mom hugged me and said, "We're going to miss you, sweetie, but we know you'll be fine. You always land on your feet." I almost laughed. They weren't going to miss me because they'd never really noticed I was there. And yes, I would be fine, because I'd been taking care of myself for as long as I could remember. Thanks for the vote of confidence, though. The first step was honoring the one person who'd ever really seen me. I couldn't be Ellie Patterson anymore. That girl was invisible, forgettable, the one who always came second. But I could be Ellie Morgan. Grandma Morgan had been the only one who noticed when I made honor roll, who remembered my birthday without being reminded, who actually listened when I talked about my plans. If I was going to disappear from the Patterson family, I was taking her name with me. I spent hours online researching the legal process for changing your last name. Turns out when you're over 18 and not trying to dodge debts or warrants, it's surprisingly straightforward. Just paperwork, filing fees, and a court appearance. Simple enough for someone who'd been handling her own paperwork since she was 16. The beauty of changing just your surname? No newspaper publication required. The Patterson family would never think to look for Ellie Morgan. The court appearance was on a Tuesday morning. I dressed in my best interview outfit, a navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews and the confidence I'd been building for 4 years of college. The judge asked why I wanted to change my name. I want to honor my late grandmother, Your Honor. She was more family to me than my actual family. He stamped the papers without any drama. Just like that, Ellie Morgan was born legally. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd shed a skin that never quite fit right. Plus, let's be honest, Ellie Morgan had a nice ring to it. Professional but approachable. The kind of name that belonged on business cards and office doors. Next was the practical stuff. New social security card, new driver's license, new bank accounts. I moved my savings, all $3,000 of it, to a new bank across town, where nobody knew the old me. I kept my cell phone number because, really, who was going to call? The Patterson family certainly wasn't checking in regularly. The hardest part was telling my friend Sarah, the one person who'd actually notice I was gone. We met for coffee at our usual place near campus. "You're doing what?" She nearly choked on her latte. "Changing my name to honor my grandmother. Fresh start, new chapter." I pulled out my new driver's license and slid it across the table. Ellie Morgan. Same me, better last name. Sarah stared at the ID like it was evidence of a crime. "This seems extreme. I mean, I know your family sucks, but changing your name entirely? Just my last name. I'm still Ellie, just not a Patterson anymore. What if there's an emergency? What if something happens to your parents? Then Tommy can handle it. He's so good at being the important one." I could see her trying to understand. But Sarah had the kind of family that remembered birthdays and showed up for graduations. She couldn't comprehend what it felt like to be a supporting character in your own life story. "Promise me you'll stay in touch," she said finally. "Of course. Same phone number, same email, just a different last name on my business card someday." She laughed despite herself. "You're completely insane, but also kind of brilliant." The apartment hunt came next. I'd been living in the dorms, but Ellie Morgan needed her own space. I found a tiny studio apartment in a complex near the city. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The lease application asked for emergency contacts. For the first time in my life, I wrote none without feeling pathetic about it. Moving day was simple since I barely owned anything. Clothes, textbooks, my laptop, and a few photos from college, carefully edited to exclude any family shots. I packed everything into my Honda and drove away from State University, from the Patterson family, from everything I'd known for 22 years. Don't worry, I wasn't running away. I was running toward something better. The apartment was smaller than my dorm room, but it felt like a palace. No Tommy's sports equipment cluttering the hallway. No conversations that stopped when I entered the room. No reminders that I was the afterthought child who was so good at taking care of herself. That night, I ordered Chinese takeout and ate it sitting on the floor since I didn't have furniture yet. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How does it feel to be Ellie Morgan?" I looked around my empty apartment, at my new driver's license on the counter, at the reflection of someone who finally had permission to put herself first. "Like coming home," I typed back. The really beautiful part was how easy it was. No one came looking for me. No frantic phone calls or missing person reports. I'd been so invisible to my own family that they didn't even notice I was gone. Mom probably assumed I was busy with post-graduation job hunting. Dad probably figured I'd call when I needed something. Tommy was definitely too wrapped up in his own life to wonder where his sister went. I got a call 3 weeks later from a number I recognized as my parents' house. For a split second, I almost answered. Then I remembered sitting alone in my graduation cap in that parking lot and let it go to voicemail. "Hi, sweetie. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you since graduation. Hope you're doing well. Love you." Mom's voice sounded exactly the same. Distracted, hurried, like she was multitasking while leaving the message. I deleted it without calling back. If they wanted to reach me, they had my number. But they'd have to actually try. That was the last time anyone from the Patterson family tried to contact me for 6 years. 6 years. Really drives home how much I was missed, doesn't it? Ellie Morgan started job hunting immediately. I targeted companies in New York City because if you're going to reinvent yourself, might as well do it somewhere that appreciates reinvention. I updated my resume, highlighting my work experience and education while carefully editing out any personal details that might connect me to my old life. The interviews went better than expected. Turns out, when you spend your whole life being overlooked, you develop excellent attention to detail and the ability to anticipate what people need before they ask for it. Skills that translate beautifully to the business world. 3 months after graduation, Ellie Morgan accepted an entry-level position with Morrison & Associates, a mid-size consulting firm in Manhattan. The salary was barely enough to cover a studio apartment in Queens and subway fare, but it was a start. And hey, at least nobody here knew I used to be invisible. I bought my train ticket to New York with cash, threw my belongings in the back of my Honda, and drove toward the city that never sleeps, toward a place where nobody knew I was supposed to be forgettable. In the rearview mirror, I watched my old life disappear. Good riddance. New York City hit me like a slap of reality wrapped in exhaust fumes and ambition. My studio apartment in Queens was roughly the size of Tommy's bedroom back home, cost more per month than my dad made in a week, and came with neighbors who seemed determined to recreate the sound of a construction site at all hours. But it was mine, Ellie Morgan's first real home. And unlike the Patterson house, no one here expected me to be grateful for being ignored. The commute to Morrison & Associates took an hour each way on the subway. An hour I used to study everyone around me. New Yorkers had this energy, this purposefulness that I'd never seen before. They walked fast, talked fast, and seemed to know exactly where they belonged in the world. I wanted that confidence so badly I could taste it. My first day at Morrison, I wore my interview outfit again because it was literally the only professional clothing I owned. Jennifer, the office manager, looked me up and down and said, "Sweetie, we need to talk about your wardrobe budget." Apparently, looking the part mattered more than I'd realized. Jennifer took me to a discount store during lunch and helped me pick out 3 additional outfits that could be mixed and matched to create the illusion of a larger wardrobe. I paid with my credit card and tried not to think about the growing balance. Nothing says professional like charging your work clothes and hoping you make enough to pay them off. "You'll figure it out," Jennifer said, echoing the phrase that had haunted my childhood. Smart girls like you always do. The job itself was entry-level administrative work, filing, answering phones, scheduling meetings for people who made more in a month than I'd ever seen in my life. But I watched everything. How they talked to clients, how they structured presentations, how they carried themselves in meetings. I absorbed it all like a sponge, because unlike my family, these people were actually worth studying. My supervisor, Robert Chen, was a junior associate who treated administrative staff like furniture that occasionally needed to be moved around. He'd snap his fingers when he needed something and never bothered learning my name, just called me assistant. "Assistant, I need the Morrison files." "Assistant, reschedule my 2 o'clock. "Assistant, get me coffee. Not that cheap stuff from the break room, the good coffee from that place down the block." I smiled and said yes to everything because I needed this job. But I also started taking notes. Not just about his requests, but about his mistakes. Robert had a habit of promising clients things he couldn't deliver, and then scrambling to cover his tracks. He double-booked meetings, forgot important deadlines, and somehow always found a way to blame the administrative errors when things went wrong. Charming. After 2 months of watching him fumble through basic tasks, I started anticipating his needs before he asked. I'd have the coffee waiting, the files organized, the schedules coordinated. He started to depend on me without even realizing it. Men like Robert always do. That's when I made my first real power move. Robert had promised a major client that he'd have their market analysis ready by Friday. Thursday afternoon, I realized he'd completely forgotten about it. The client was flying in from Chicago specifically for this presentation. Robert was in full panic mode. "Assistant, where's the Henderson analysis?" "You haven't started it yet," I said calmly. His face went white. "What do you mean I haven't started it?" "I specifically asked you to handle the preliminary research last week." Now this was a lie. He'd never asked me to do anything beyond filing and coffee runs, but I could see him setting me up to take the blame for his failure. How original. "Actually," I said, pulling out my notebook, "I took the initiative to compile some preliminary data, just in case." I handed him a folder I'd been working on during lunch breaks. "It's not complete, but it's a start." Robert grabbed the folder like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. The data was good. Better than good, actually. I'd been teaching myself market analysis using online tutorials and library books, treating it like homework I'd assigned myself. Funny how you learn things faster when you're not expecting someone else to do the work for you. He stayed late that night turning my research into a presentation. Friday morning, he delivered it to the client and got praised for his thorough analysis and attention to detail. He never thanked me, but he also never forgot that I'd saved his job. That afternoon, Jennifer stopped by my desk. "I hear you've been doing some additional research projects." I kept my face neutral, just trying to be helpful. "Robert mentioned you might be interested in taking on more analytical work. How would you feel about a small promotion? Administrative associate with research responsibilities? It came with a modest raise and the opportunity to attend client meetings as a note-taker. More importantly, it meant I was no longer just assistant. I had a title, responsibilities, and access to the parts of the business I'd been watching from the outside. I'd love the opportunity, I said. That weekend, I celebrated by buying myself a decent business outfit with my credit card and allowing myself to imagine a future where Ellie Morgan was more than just someone who disappeared from a family that never noticed her anyway. The promotion changed everything. Suddenly, I was in meetings, hearing how deals were structured, watching negotiations happen in real time. I learned that business was part strategy, part psychology, and part pure confidence. I was good at the first two and working hard on the third. I also learned that most of the junior associates were winging it just as much as I was. They had fancy degrees and family connections, but they didn't necessarily work harder or think more clearly than I did. They just had better clothes and more confidence in their right to be there. Well, I could work on both of those things. 6 months into my New York life, I was working late one evening when I overheard Robert on a phone call with a potential client. He was pitching an analysis of emerging markets in the tech sector, a project that was way beyond his actual expertise. After he hung up, I knocked on his office door. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with Mr. Davidson. The tech sector analysis sounds fascinating. Robert looked nervous. Yeah, it'll be challenging. I've been reading a lot about emerging markets lately. Would you like me to put together some preliminary research? Relief flooded his face. That would be extremely helpful, Ellie. Very proactive of you. Ellie. He'd finally learned my name. Progress. This became our pattern. Robert would land clients with promises he couldn't keep, and I'd figure out how to keep them. He got the credit, but I was learning the business from the ground up and building a reputation as someone who delivered results. Not exactly what I'd planned, but hey, we work with what we've got. It wasn't the career path I'd imagined, but it was working. Slowly, carefully, Ellie Morgan was building something real, something that belonged entirely to her. By my second year at Morrison & Associates, I'd figured out the game. Robert would take credit for my work during the day, and I'd stay late teaching myself everything he should have known. Market analysis, financial modeling, industry research. I consumed it all through online courses, library books, and careful observation of the senior associates who actually knew what they were doing. The breakthrough came when I caught a mistake that would have cost us a major client. Robert had been working on a telecommunications deal for weeks, relying heavily on my research while pretending he understood the technical aspects. The night before the final presentation, I was reviewing the contracts when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The client was about to invest heavily in a technology that was already being phased out by industry leaders. Oops. I knocked on Robert's office door at 9 p.m. We have a problem. I walked him through the issue, showing him articles from trade publications and financial reports he'd never bothered to read. The technology our client wanted to invest in was dead in the water, but they didn't know it yet. If Morrison & Associates let them proceed without warning them, we'd either lose the client when they lost money or get sued for negligent advice. Neither option looked great on a performance review. Robert went pale. What do? We tell them the truth, tonight, before they sign anything. But the commission will be zero if they sue us or never trust us again. Sometimes I amazed myself with my brilliant insights. Robert made the call. The client was initially furious that we were changing our recommendation at the last minute, but grateful when we showed them the evidence. We restructured the entire deal, saving them millions and proving that Morrison & Associates had their best interests at heart. Revolutionary concept, I know. Monday morning, Mr. Morrison himself stopped by my desk. Ellie, I understand you were instrumental in saving the telecom deal this weekend. Just doing my job, sir. He smiled. Your job is administrative support. What you did was strategic analysis that prevented a disaster. We need to talk. That conversation led to another promotion. Research analyst with my own office and a salary that finally covered my rent without requiring creative budgeting. More importantly, I was no longer working through Robert. I reported directly to Jennifer Walsh, a senior associate who actually recognized talent when she saw it. What a refreshing change of pace. Jennifer became the mentor I'd never had. She taught me how to present findings to clients, how to structure reports for maximum impact, and how to navigate office politics without compromising my integrity. She also introduced me to the concept that would change my life: consulting partnerships. The real money isn't in working for firms like Morrison, she explained over lunch one day. It's in building your own client base and taking them with you when you're ready to go independent. The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Build my own business? Ellie Morgan, who'd been invisible for most of her life, running her own consulting firm? The irony wasn't lost on me. You have something most people don't, Jennifer continued. You see problems before they become disasters, and you solve them quietly without needing credit. Clients value that more than flashy presentations. Over the next year, I started building relationships with the clients I worked with directly, not in a way that undermined Morrison and Associates, but by being genuinely helpful and memorable. I'd follow up on projects, send relevant articles I'd found, and always deliver exactly what I'd promised when I'd promised it. Novel approach, apparently. The telecommunications client referred me to a colleague who needed help with a market entry strategy. I handled it as a Morrison project, but the client specifically requested to work with me again. Then another referral came in. And another. Funny how people notice when you actually do your job well. Jennifer watched this pattern developing and made me an offer I hadn't expected. What if I told you I was thinking about leaving Morrison and starting my own firm? And what if I offered you a partnership instead of just a job? Walsh & Morgan Consulting. The name sounded impossible and perfect at the same time. I can't invest much capital, I admitted. You don't need to. You bring the client relationships and the analytical skills. I bring 15 years of experience and some seed money from my savings. We split everything 50-50. That night, I sat in my Queens apartment, which I'd finally furnished with real furniture instead of milk crates and dreams, and tried to wrap my head around what was happening. Ellie Morgan, equal partner in a consulting firm. The girl who couldn't get her own family to notice her was about to become a business owner. I called Sarah, my one remaining connection to my old life. You're doing what now? She laughed. Starting a consulting firm, Walsh & Morgan. Morgan? That's your last name now? Has been for 3 years. It suits me. I keep forgetting you're not Ellie Patterson anymore. You sound different when you talk about work. Different how? Confident. Like you know you belong there. 6 months later, we made the jump. Jennifer and I gave Morrison & Associates our notice and opened an office in a small space in Midtown. Our first month, we had 3 clients, all referrals from people who'd specifically asked to work with me. Not bad for a girl who used to be invisible. By the end of our first year, we had 12 regular clients and a waiting list. Our specialty was helping mid-sized companies navigate market changes and avoid costly mistakes. Word spread that Walsh & Morgan could spot problems others missed and deliver solutions that actually worked. Who would have thought that paying attention to details actually mattered in business? The money was better than I'd ever imagined. Not just enough to live comfortably, but enough to save, invest, and plan for a future that belonged entirely to Ellie Morgan. I moved to a real apartment in Manhattan, bought clothes that fit properly, and started carrying myself like someone who deserved to be in the rooms where decisions were made. But the best part wasn't the money or the success. It was the respect. Clients listened when I talked. They implemented my recommendations. They referred their colleagues because they trusted my judgment. For someone who'd spent her life being overlooked, that recognition was worth more than any paycheck. 3 years into running Walsh & Morgan, we landed our biggest client yet, a tech company going through a major transition. The project was complex enough to require a full presentation to their board of directors, including some significant media presence. Ellie, Jennifer said after we'd won the contract, I think it's time we start raising our profile. Conference speaking, industry publications, maybe some media interviews. Media interviews? The idea made my stomach flip. You're the face of the analytical work. You should get credit for what you've built. I thought about that conversation for weeks. Media attention meant visibility. Visibility meant the possibility that someone from my old life might see me. After 4 years of Ellie Morgan's carefully constructed existence, was I ready to risk exposure? Then I realized something important. I wasn't hiding anymore. I'd built a life worth being proud of, and if the Patterson family happened to see it, that was their business. Ellie Morgan had nothing to hide from. Unlike some families I knew, my success was actually earned. Schedule the interviews, I told Jennifer. It's time. The Forbes interview changed everything. Not because I said anything revolutionary, but because sometimes the right story finds you at exactly the right moment. Young Entrepreneurs Reshaping Business Consulting was the headline, with a photo of me in my office overlooking Manhattan. The journalist Rebecca Santos had been impressed by our client retention rate and the fact that we'd grown 200% year over year while maintaining our boutique approach. Most consulting firms scale by adding junior staff, she'd noted. You've maintained quality by being selective about clients. That's unusual for someone your age. I'd rather solve the right problems really well than create new problems by growing too fast, I'd answered. Amazing how that concept confuses people. The article quoted that line and went into detail about our approach to preventive consulting, identifying issues before they became crises. It mentioned our success with the tech company transition and included a sidebar about how we'd saved clients collectively over $30 million in bad investments. I looked professional in the photo, confident, like someone who belonged in a Forbes article. Certainly more successful than anyone who'd sat in a graduation cap alone 6 years ago. The morning it published online, my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression I couldn't read. "Ellie, you have about 30 interview requests and your phone hasn't stopped ringing." Within a week, I was fielding calls from companies 3 times larger than any we'd worked with before. Harvard Business Review wanted to feature our methodology in their next issue. CNBC booked me for a segment about emerging trends in strategic consulting. Apparently, preventing disasters was a hot topic. Who knew? "You realize what this means," Jennifer said as we reviewed the new client inquiries. "We're not a small firm anymore. Not if we take even half of these contracts." She was right. The Forbes article had positioned Walsh & Morgan as innovators, rather than just another consulting company. Companies were coming to us specifically because they'd read about our track record of preventing disasters, rather than just managing them after they happened. The CNBC interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I spent the weekend preparing, practicing sound bites about our philosophy, and rehearsing answers to probable questions. Jennifer helped me pick an outfit that read as successful but approachable, and coached me on speaking in television-friendly time chunks. "Remember," she said as we reviewed my talking points one final time, "you're not Ellie, the girl who disappeared from her family. You're Ellie Morgan, founding partner of Walsh & Morgan Consulting. Own that." The interview took place in CNBC's Midtown studio. I'd been nervous, but once the cameras started rolling, I felt oddly calm. The anchor, Michael Roberts, asked smart questions about our growth strategy and the emerging trends we were seeing in the market. "What advice would you give to other young professionals looking to start their own firms?" "Don't wait for permission," I heard myself say. "Don't wait for someone else to validate your ideas or give you a platform. If you see a problem that needs solving and you know how to solve it, start solving it. The credibility comes from the results." That sounds like the voice of experience. I suppose it is, though I'd recommend getting your family's support first if you're lucky enough to have that. The slight edge in my voice was probably lost on viewers, but it felt good to say. After the interview, the producer mentioned they'd received several calls during the segment from viewers asking for our contact information. "That doesn't usually happen with business interviews," she said. "You clearly struck a nerve." The segment aired that evening. I watched it from my apartment with a bottle of wine and a growing sense of unreality. There I was on national television talking about business strategy like I'd been doing it my whole life. The confident woman on screen bore no resemblance to the invisible girl who'd sat alone in a graduation cap 6 years earlier. My phone started buzzing almost immediately after the segment ended. New client inquiries, interview requests, and congratulations from colleagues. But there was one call I almost didn't recognize. "Sarah. Oh my God, Ellie, I just saw you on CNBC. Pretty surreal, right?" "Surreal. You looked like you belonged there. You looked so professional, successful." "I am professional and successful." It felt good to say that without qualifying it. "I know, but seeing you on TV made it real somehow. My roommate was watching with me and she was like, 'Wait, you know her?' I felt like a celebrity by association." We talked for an hour, catching up on her life and mine. She'd gotten married, moved to Denver, and was working as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit. Normal life progression for someone who hadn't reinvented herself completely. "Can I ask you something?" she said toward the end of the call. "Sure. Do you ever miss it? Being part of a family, I mean? Having people who knew you before you were successful?" I looked around my apartment. My successful, carefully curated, completely independent life. I miss the idea of having a family that cared about me. But I never actually had that, so I can't miss something that didn't exist. That's incredibly sad. Or incredibly freeing. Depends on your perspective. After we hung up, I sat by my window looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, maybe my family had seen the interview. Maybe they'd recognized the daughter and sister they'd forgotten about. Maybe they were wondering how invisible Ellie Patterson had become Ellie Morgan, successful businesswoman. The thought didn't upset me the way it might have a year ago. If they'd seen it, they'd seen what they'd missed out on by never bothering to notice me. Their loss, not mine. But I also realized something else. I wasn't completely free of them yet. Part of me still cared what they might think, still wondered if they'd finally be proud of what I'd accomplished. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. After everything, some small part of me was still that girl waiting for approval. Have you ever experienced something amazing and realized you still cared about people who'd never cared about you? Drop a comment below about how you handled it, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying Ellie's journey. Ellie Morgan had built an incredible life, but she wasn't quite finished becoming herself. The real test would come when the past finally caught up with the present. And based on how much attention that Forbes article was getting, that confrontation might be coming sooner than I'd expected. The success from the Forbes article and CNBC interview created a snowball effect I hadn't anticipated. Within 6 months, Walsh & Morgan had doubled in size, moved to a larger office in a prestigious building, and I was being invited to speak at conferences across the country. Not bad for someone who used to be professionally invisible, but the real game changer came when Marcus Wellington called. Wellington Industries was a Fortune 500 company facing a crisis that had already cost them 2 CEOs and hundreds of millions in lost revenue. Their board had seen my CNBC interview and wanted to know if I thought their situation was salvageable. Most consulting firms we've talked to want to restructure everything, Marcus explained during our first meeting. Massive layoffs, complete reorganization, the whole disaster playbook. But you specialize in prevention, not cleanup. What would you have done differently 6 months ago? I spent 2 weeks analyzing everything they'd done wrong, which was considerable. They'd ignored market shifts, dismissed customer complaints, and made strategic decisions based on wishful thinking rather than data. But underneath all the mistakes, the core business was still sound. Amazing what happens when you actually look at the fundamentals instead of just following trends. You don't need a complete overhaul, I told their board. You need to stop the bleeding, address the customer trust issues, and implement systems that prevent this from happening again. It's surgery, not amputation. The contract was worth more than Walsh & Morgan had made in our entire first year. More importantly, it put us on the map as the firm that could save companies everyone else had written off. Jennifer and I worked 18-hour days for 3 months, basically living at Wellington Industries while we implemented our recovery plan. We restructured their customer service protocols, overhauled their market analysis systems, and trained their executives to spot the warning signs we'd identified. Turns out, most corporate disasters are preventable if someone's actually paying attention. The turnaround was dramatic. Within 6 months, Wellington's stock price had recovered 40% of its losses. Within a year, they were posting record profits. The business press called it one of the most successful corporate recoveries in recent history. Ellie Morgan saves Wellington Industries was the Harvard Business Review headline that made me realize I'd crossed into a different tier of recognition. This wasn't just success. This was the kind of career-defining achievement that established reputations permanently. The speaking invitations multiplied. Business schools wanted me to lecture about preventive consulting. Industry conferences featured me as a keynote speaker. I was invited to join boards, serve on advisory committees, and consult for companies I'd only read about in business magazines. My personal life adapted to match my professional success. I moved to a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made me feel like I was floating above the city. I hired a personal assistant, started using a car service instead of the subway, and built a wardrobe that reflected my new status. Not bad for someone whose family used to forget her birthday. But the most satisfying part was the respect. When I walked into boardrooms, conversations stopped. When I spoke at conferences, people took notes. When I gave recommendations, companies implemented them without question. Ellie Morgan had become someone people listened to, someone who mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me that the skills I'd developed from being invisible in my own family, observation, anticipation, solving problems quietly, had become my greatest professional assets. What the Pattersons had seen as self-sufficiency that excused their neglect, the business world valued as strategic thinking and proactive leadership. I was profiled in Fortune, featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, and invited to speak at the World Economic Forum. Each new achievement felt like another step away from the girl who'd sat alone in a graduation cap, waiting for a family that never came. The transformation was complete in every way that mattered. Ellie Morgan wasn't just successful, she was influential. She was someone whose opinions shaped industries and whose recommendations moved markets. But success at this level came with unexpected challenges. The bigger we grew, the more we attracted attention from competitors, journalists, and people who wanted to find flaws in our story. Jennifer handled most of the background checks and media inquiries, but she mentioned that reporters were getting more persistent about wanting to know details about my background. They're looking for the origin story, she explained. Self-made entrepreneurs are good copy, but mysterious self-made entrepreneurs are better copy. Someone's going to start digging deeper eventually. The thought should have worried me more than it did. But Ellie Morgan had nothing to hide. She was exactly what she appeared to be. Someone who'd built something remarkable through talent, hard work, and refusing to accept limitations other people tried to impose. If the Patterson family saw any of this coverage, they'd see what they'd missed by never bothering to notice their daughter. And honestly, Good. Let them wonder how invisible Ellie became Ellie Morgan, the business strategist who saved Fortune 500 companies. That evening, I stood in my penthouse office looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, in boardrooms and corner offices, executives were implementing strategies I'd developed. Companies were avoiding disasters because they'd learned to spot the warning signs I'd taught them to recognize. Tomorrow, I had meetings with 3 potential new clients and a conference call with an international company that wanted to establish preventive consulting protocols across all their divisions. Next week, I was flying to London for a speaking engagement that would establish Walsh & Morgan's European presence. 6 years ago, I'd been invisible to my own family. Now I was reshaping how major corporations approach strategic planning. The journey from Ellie Patterson to Ellie Morgan was complete. But I had a feeling the most interesting chapters were still ahead. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion of this transformation story. The phone call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning while I was reviewing contracts in my office. My assistant buzzed through with an unusual request. Ellie, I have a producer from 60 Minutes on the line. They want to do a segment about the Wellington Industries turnaround and the rise of preventive consulting. They're specifically interested in you as the face of this new approach. 60 Minutes. The most watched news magazine in America. The show that could make or break reputations with a single segment. No pressure at all. Tell them I'll call back in an hour, I said, needing time to think through the implications. This wasn't a business publication or a brief cable news interview. This was primetime television. The kind of exposure that reached everyone in America, including people in small Pennsylvania towns who thought their daughter had simply moved away for work. Jennifer was traveling, so I called Sarah instead. 60 Minutes wants to interview me, I said without preamble. Holy shit, Ellie, that's incredible. It's also terrifying. What if your family sees it? I'd never explicitly told Sarah the details of my disappearance, just that I'd had a falling out with my family and chosen to start fresh. But she'd always been perceptive about the things I didn't say. Yeah, would that be such a bad thing? I mean, you're incredibly successful. Maybe they'd be proud. They had 22 years to be proud and couldn't manage it. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. But you're not that invisible girl anymore. You're Ellie Morgan, business superstar. Maybe they'd see you differently now. I thought about that conversation all day. Ellie Morgan was successful enough that even the Pattersons would have to acknowledge her achievements. But did I want their acknowledgement now, after building a life that didn't need their approval? I called the 60 Minutes producer back. I'm interested, but I have some conditions about what I will and won't discuss, such as business strategy, consulting methodology, the Wellington turnaround, all fair game. Personal background, family history, anything before I started my career, off limits. There was a pause. That might actually make the story more intriguing. The mysterious entrepreneur who won't discuss her past. Very compelling television. Great. Nothing like being mysterious to attract exactly the kind of attention I was trying to avoid. The interview was scheduled for the following month in our office. The 60 Minutes team wanted to capture the environment where Ellie Morgan worked, show the visual symbols of success that reinforced the narrative of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. They spent 3 days filming, interviews, office shots, meetings with clients who agreed to be featured. The correspondent, Margaret Chen, was thorough but respectful of my boundaries. She asked about my business philosophy, my methodology, my predictions for the industry. She didn't push when I deflected personal questions. You've built something remarkable in a very short time, she said during one of our conversations. Most people would want to talk about the journey that got them here. The journey isn't the story, I replied. The results are the story. But viewers connect with the personal elements. They want to understand what drives someone to achieve at your level. What drives me is seeing problems before they become disasters and having the skills to prevent them. Everything else is just background noise. And boy, did I have some background noise to avoid. She seemed to accept that Ellie Morgan was someone who preferred to let her work speak for itself. The segment was scheduled to air on a Sunday evening in March. I planned to watch it alone in my apartment with a bottle of good wine and my phone turned off. Whatever happened after it aired, I'd deal with Monday morning. The 12-minute segment exceeded my expectations. They focused on the Wellington Industries recovery, interviewed executives who credited our work with saving their company, and positioned preventive consulting as a revolutionary approach that was changing how major corporations operated. The visuals were perfect. My office with its Manhattan view, footage of me presenting to Wellington's board, testimonials from grateful clients. I looked confident, successful, and completely in control of the narrative. Margaret's closing commentary was particularly gratifying. Ellie Morgan represents a new generation of business leaders who believe the best way to solve a crisis is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Her approach has already saved her clients hundreds of millions of dollars and may well change how American businesses approach strategic planning. The segment ended with a shot of me in my office, looking out at the city skyline. The image of someone who'd conquered New York through talent and determination. My phone started ringing before the credits finished rolling. New client inquiries, interview requests, congratulations from colleagues. Walsh & Morgan's website crashed from traffic volume. My assistant would have dozens of messages waiting Monday morning. But there was one call I answered immediately. Sarah was crying. "Ellie, that was incredible. You looked so professional, so successful. I'm so proud of you. Thanks. Though I'm starting to think I should have kept a lower profile." "Are you kidding? You're about to become the most famous business consultant in America. This is going to change everything." She was right. This level of exposure would attract attention from everyone: clients, competitors, journalists, and people from my past who might finally connect Ellie Morgan with Ellie Patterson. I'd built Ellie Morgan to be impossible to ignore. Mission accomplished. But as I sat in my apartment that night, looking at the city lights and thinking about the life I'd created, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of being discovered anymore. I'd become someone worth discovering. If the Patterson family saw that segment and recognized their forgotten daughter, they'd see what they'd lost when they chose Tommy's baseball game over my college graduation. They'd see the person they could have been proud of if they'd bothered to notice I existed. That thought should have satisfied me. But it also raised a question I wasn't ready to answer. What would I do if they actually tried to find me now? Would the girl who'd waited 22 years for their approval finally get her moment of vindication? Or would Ellie Morgan prove that she really didn't need them anymore? I had a feeling I was about to find out. The call started Monday morning. My assistant, Caroline, buzzed through with an apologetic tone. "Ellie, I have someone on line 3 claiming to be your brother. He says it's urgent family business. Should I take a message?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After 6 years of carefully constructed separation, Tommy Patterson had found Ellie Morgan. Well, that didn't take long. Tell him I'm in meetings all day and take his information. But the calls kept coming. My mother Tuesday afternoon, my father Wednesday morning. Each time, Caroline politely took messages while I sat in my office wondering how long I could avoid the inevitable. The messages were what I'd expected: shocked recognition, claims of pride in my accomplishments, and urgent requests to talk about family matters. No apologies for missing my graduation. No acknowledgement of the years of invisibility. Just sudden interest now that Ellie Morgan was someone worth knowing. How predictable. Friday afternoon, Caroline knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to read as "situation requiring your immediate attention." "They're here," she said quietly. "Who's here?" "Your parents. And your brother. They're in the lobby asking to see you. Security called up because they don't have an appointment, but they're insisting it's urgent family business." Through my office window, I could see the Manhattan street 40 floors below, people moving with purpose, living their lives, completely unaware that Ellie Morgan's carefully constructed world was about to collide with Ellie Patterson's abandoned past. Tell security to escort them to Conference Room B and Caroline. Clear my calendar for the rest of the day. I took 5 minutes to compose myself, checking my appearance in the mirror and reminding myself who I was now. Ellie Morgan, founding partner of Walsh & Morgan Consulting, someone who commanded respect and made decisions that affected Fortune 500 companies. Not Ellie Patterson, the invisible daughter who could be overlooked without consequence. They were standing by the conference room windows when I walked in, looking out at the view that represented everything I'd built. My mother had aged, her hair completely gray now. My father looked smaller somehow, less imposing than he'd seemed when I was 22. Tommy had filled out, no longer the teenager whose baseball games had been more important than my graduation. "Ellie," my mother breathed, turning toward me with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Morgan," I corrected, taking a seat at the head of the conference table. "And you are?" I couldn't help myself. "Sue me." The pretense lasted exactly 3 seconds before my mother broke. "Sweetheart, we've been looking for you for years. We had no idea you'd changed your name, moved to New York. We saw you on 60 Minutes and couldn't believe that invisible Ellie Patterson had become someone worth acknowledging." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret them. My father cleared his throat. "Ellie, you'll always be Ellie to us. We know we made mistakes. But we're family. We want to make things right." "Make things right?" I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. "What exactly do you think went wrong?" Tommy spoke for the first time. We know we hurt you. Missing your graduation was inexcusable. We've regretted it every day since. Every day since, I repeated. Interesting, because it took you 6 years and a national television appearance to regret it enough to actually look for me. The silence stretched uncomfortably. They'd come expecting a reunion, a tearful reconciliation. Instead, they were facing Ellie Morgan in a Manhattan boardroom, and Ellie Morgan didn't operate by Patterson family rules. We've missed you, my mother tried again. The house hasn't been the same without you. I wouldn't know. I haven't been there. Amazing how they missed someone they'd never noticed was there in the first place. That's what we want to change, my father said, leaning forward earnestly. We want you to come home. Be part of the family again. I almost laughed. After 6 years of building a life without them, they thought I'd abandon everything to return to being invisible in their small Pennsylvania town. And why would I do that? Because we're family, Tommy said, as if that explained everything. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. Tell me, Tommy, what position did you play in high school? He looked confused. Shortstop, you know that. What's my favorite color? Another pause. When's my birthday? The silence was deafening. You want me to come home to be part of a family that doesn't know my birthday, but remembers your baseball position from a decade ago? The irony was almost poetic. My mother's face crumpled. We know we weren't perfect parents. Perfect? I stood up, moving to the window. You forgot I existed unless you needed something. You missed every important moment of my life. You literally chose Tommy's college baseball game over my college graduation. We explained that, my father said defensively. There were scouts. There were always scouts. There was always something more important than whatever Ellie needed. I turned back to face them. But here's what's interesting. You found Ellie Morgan. You tracked down my business, figured out how to get past security, and demanded to see me immediately. When it mattered to you, when you wanted something, you figured out how to find me. We wanted to reconnect with our daughter, my mother said. Your daughter. Right. I walked back to the table. Tell me about your daughter. What has she accomplished? What is she passionate about? What are her goals? More silence. You don't know, do you? You know Ellie Morgan from television, but you don't know your daughter, because you never bothered to learn who she was. Tommy tried a different approach. Look, we're proud of what you've accomplished. This business, your success, it's incredible. Now you're proud. Now that I'm someone other people recognize? The timing was fascinating. Really. We were always proud, my mother insisted. I opened my laptop and pulled up my calendar. I have meetings scheduled with 3 Fortune 500 CEOs next week. I'm flying to London next month for a consulting contract worth more than most people make in a lifetime. 60 Minutes wants to do a follow-up segment about the industry changes my work has created. I closed the laptop and looked at each of them in turn. Ellie Morgan is busy. Ellie Morgan matters. Ellie Morgan has people who value her time and expertise. I stood up again, smoothing my skirt. Ellie Patterson was invisible. Ellie Morgan is impossible to ignore. That's not an accident. That's a choice I made when I decided to stop waiting for you to notice I existed. We want to help you, my father said suddenly. Support your business. Invest in your success. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. I stared at him, processing what he'd just offered. The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. Invest in my success? We've done well for ourselves over the years, he continued, missing the ice in my voice entirely. We could provide capital for expansion, help you grow even faster. My mother nodded eagerly. We know we missed out on supporting you before, but we can make up for it now. Families should support each other. Tommy jumped in with what he probably thought was helpful enthusiasm. Dad's construction company has been really successful. We could easily invest a few $100,000 in your consulting firm. A few $100,000. In Walsh & Morgan, which was already worth 8 figures and growing. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Let me understand this correctly, I said, walking back to my seat. You want to invest money in my business? Exactly, my father said, relief flooding his voice. We can be partners. Real family partners. And in exchange? In exchange, you come home. We rebuild our relationship. You can run your business from anywhere these days, right? Technology makes location irrelevant. I sat down slowly, my mind racing through the implications of what they were proposing. They wanted to buy me back, purchase a relationship with Ellie Morgan by investing in her success. The business world had taught me to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one. You think I need your money? Everyone can use more capital, Tommy said. Even successful businesses need investors. That's true, I agreed. Businesses do need investors. Good ones. I opened my laptop again and pulled up Walsh & Morgan's financial reports. The numbers I was about to share weren't public knowledge, but my family was about to learn exactly what they'd missed out on by ignoring me for 6 years. Our revenue last year was $18 million, I said casually, watching their faces. Profit margin was 42%. We have $38 million in client contracts already signed for this year, with a waiting list of companies requesting our services. The color drained from my father's face. Our European expansion launches next month with offices in London, Paris, and Frankfurt. Our Asia-Pacific division opens in Singapore this fall. By the end of next year, Walsh & Morgan will be the largest preventive consulting firm in the world. I closed the laptop again. We don't need investors. We turn down investment offers weekly from firms that want to buy us out for amounts that would make your construction company look like a lemonade stand. The silence in the room was different now. Not uncomfortable, but stunned. The company you want to invest a few $100,000 in, I continued, is worth approximately $85 million. My personal net worth is just over $22 million. Tommy's mouth actually fell open. At least someone in my family was finally impressed by something I'd accomplished. So when you offer to help my business with your construction money, what you're really doing is offering to buy access to a daughter you couldn't be bothered to notice when she wasn't profitable. That's not... We didn't know, my mother stammered. Of course you didn't know, because you never asked. In 6 years, not one of you tried to find me, until you saw me on television and realized I might be worth knowing. I stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the city where I'd built everything they were now trying to purchase their way into. Here's what's interesting about families, I said without turning around. Real families support each other before success, not after it. Real families show up for graduations even when there are baseball games. Real families notice when someone disappears for 6 years. We made mistakes, my father said quietly. No, I turned back to face them. You made choices. Consistent choices over and over for 22 years. You chose to ignore me, overlook me, and forget about me every time something more interesting came along. But we want to fix that now, my mother pleaded. Now that I'm rich enough to be worth your attention. It's not about the money. It's entirely about the money. If Ellie Morgan was still an administrative assistant making $30,000 a year, would you have tracked me down after seeing me in a brief news segment? Or would you have said, oh, look, there's Ellie on TV and gone back to your regular lives? None of them answered because we all knew the truth. You want to know what's really sad? I continued. I would have given anything for this conversation 6 years ago. I would have been so grateful for your attention, your pride, your investment in my life. I walked back to the conference table and placed my hands on the back of my chair. But Ellie Morgan doesn't need your approval. She doesn't need your money. And she definitely doesn't need a family that only shows up after she becomes successful enough to matter. Please, my mother said, tears flowing freely now. We know we were wrong. We know we hurt you. But we're here now. Doesn't that count for something? For a moment? I almost wavered. The girl who'd waited 22 years for them to notice her wanted to say yes. It counted for everything. But Ellie Morgan knew better. You're here now because I'm worth $85 million. If I was worth nothing, you'd still be wondering whatever happened to Ellie. I moved toward the door. Here's my counteroffer to your investment proposal. Take the money you wanted to give me and donate it to college scholarships for students whose families can't afford to support their education. Students whose parents work 3 jobs to pay tuition. Students who sit alone at graduation because their families had more important things to do. I opened the conference room door. Caroline will validate your parking. Security will escort you to the lobby. Ellie, please, my father called as I stepped into the hallway. I turned back one final time. Ellie Patterson died 6 years ago in a college parking lot. You're looking for someone who doesn't exist anymore. Then who are you? Tommy asked desperately. I smiled, and for the first time in the entire meeting, it was genuine. I'm Ellie Morgan, and I'm everything Ellie Patterson could have been if anyone had bothered to notice she existed. They didn't leave. For 2 weeks after our conference room meeting, the Patterson family launched what could only be described as a campaign to win me back. It started with flowers delivered to my office every day, expensive arrangements with cards signed, "Your loving family." Then came the letters, handwritten and heartfelt, detailing memories I apparently should have cherished, and apologizing for oversights that were actually systematic neglect. Tommy showed up at my building twice, trying to convince security he needed to deliver urgent family documents. My mother called Walsh & Morgan repeatedly, claiming there was a medical emergency that required my immediate attention. My father somehow got Caroline's direct number and left rambling voicemails about how much they missed me. It was pathetic and manipulative, and exactly what I should have expected from people who'd never learned to hear the word no. Some things never change. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I returned to my penthouse to find my mother sitting in the lobby of my building. The doorman was very understanding when I explained the situation, she said, standing up with obvious relief when she saw me. I told him I was your mother and that we'd had a misunderstanding. Did you tell him you haven't spoken to your daughter in 6 years because you forgot she existed? Ellie, please. Can we just talk? Really talk? Against my better judgment, I let her come up to my apartment. Maybe it was curiosity about what new manipulation she'd attempt, or maybe some part of me still wanted to hear what she thought justified 6 years of silence followed by 2 weeks of harassment. She walked through my penthouse like she was touring a museum, touching furniture and staring at the view with obvious awe. You've done so well for yourself, she murmured. This is incredible. It's home. It's like something out of a magazine. She settled onto my couch, looking small and out of place among the careful elegance I'd created. I always knew you were special, Ellie. Even when you were little, you were so independent, so capable, so easy to ignore. We never ignored you. Mom. I sat across from her, my patience already thin. Can we skip the rewriting history part of this conversation? We both know what my childhood was like. She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. I know we weren't perfect parents, but we did love you. You loved the idea of having a daughter who didn't require any attention. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward. When was the last time you called me before seeing me on television? You changed your name. When was the last time you tried to find me? Asked mutual friends? Searched online? Hired a private investigator? When was the last time you wondered if I was safe, happy, alive? The silence stretched between us. We assumed you were fine. You always landed on your feet. There it is. The excuse that justified 6 years of not caring whether your daughter existed. Some patterns never break. My mother started crying then, the kind of desperate tears that are supposed to make you feel guilty for causing pain. I want my daughter back, she sobbed. I want us to be a family again. Your daughter is dead, I said quietly. She died in a parking lot 6 years ago when she realized her family would rather watch a baseball game than celebrate the biggest achievement of her life. Don't say that. It's true. Ellie Patterson, the girl who waited 22 years for you to notice her, is gone. Ellie Morgan took her place. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You know what's funny? I spent so many years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't earn your attention, your pride, your basic acknowledgement. I thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, caused fewer problems, you'd finally see me. I turned back to face her. But there was never anything wrong with me. The problem was that you were looking for reasons not to care rather than reasons to notice. That's not true, isn't it? Every achievement was dismissed because I was so independent. Every disappointment was my responsibility to handle because I was so capable. Every missed birthday or forgotten event was acceptable because I understood that other things were more important. My mother wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. We made mistakes. But families forgive each other. Families work through problems together. Families do work through problems together. I agreed. But this isn't a problem that can be worked through. This is 22 years of systematic neglect followed by 6 years of complete indifference. You didn't even notice I was gone until I became successful enough to be worth noticing. We noticed... When? When exactly did you notice? Another long silence. We saw you on 60 Minutes and realized that you'd missed out on claiming credit for someone successful. That's what you realized. I walked back to where she sat, looking down at the woman who'd given birth to me but never bothered to know me. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my apartment, my building, and my life. You're going to stop calling my office, stop sending flowers, and stop harassing my staff. You're going to go back to Pennsylvania and live the life you chose when you decided I wasn't worth your attention. You can't mean that. I absolutely mean that. Ellie Morgan doesn't have time for people who only care about her because she's profitable. Ellie Morgan surrounds herself with people who valued her before she was worth $22 million. I walked to the door and held it open. This is goodbye, not see you later or let's keep in touch. This is goodbye forever. My mother stood up slowly, her face stricken. You'll regret this. Family is forever. Money and success don't last, but family is always there. I almost laughed at the irony. You weren't there for graduation. You weren't there for birthdays. You weren't there when I moved to a new city, started a business, or built the life you're now trying to buy your way into. You weren't there for any of it. I gestured toward the hallway. The only thing family is forever guaranteed to do is disappoint you when you need them most. Ellie Morgan learned that lesson and moved on. She walked to the door but stopped in the threshold. I'll always be your mother. Biology doesn't make you family. Care does. And you stopped caring about me long before I stopped being Ellie Patterson. After she left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, the city that had welcomed Ellie Morgan and never once made her feel invisible. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the news about your family finding you. How are you handling it? I typed back. They didn't find me. They found Ellie Morgan. There's a difference. For the first time in 6 years, I felt completely free. The girl who'd waited for their approval was finally, truly dead. Ellie Morgan was all that remained. And Ellie Morgan had better things to do than waste time on people who only loved her when she was worth loving. 6 months later, I was standing in the boardroom of Wellington Industries, watching their CEO present the quarterly results that proved our preventive consulting had saved them over $150 million in potential losses. The success was so significant that other Fortune 500 companies were restructuring their entire strategic planning processes to implement our methodologies. Ellie, Marcus Wellington said as the meeting concluded, I hope you know that you didn't just save our company. You revolutionized how we think about business entirely. The compliment should have felt satisfying, but mostly I felt grateful. Grateful for the work that challenged me, the colleagues who respected me, and the life I'd built that had nothing to do with winning approval from people who'd never deserved my effort. That evening, I was cleaning out my desk when Caroline knocked with an envelope that had been delivered by messenger. No return address, she said, but the delivery service said it was urgent. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small Pennsylvania paper. Local business owner expands construction company. The article featured my father standing next to a new building, discussing his success and mentioning his family, my wife Diane, my son Tommy, and my daughter who works in business in New York. No name, just my daughter who works in business. Even after everything, after seeing me on national television and tracking me down in Manhattan, I was still just a vague reference in their lives. Not Ellie Morgan, successful entrepreneur. Not even Ellie Patterson, the daughter they'd lost. Just my daughter who works in business. The consistency was almost admirable. I threw the clipping in the trash and felt nothing but relief. The real celebration came the following week, when Jennifer and I signed the contracts for our international expansion. Walsh and Morgan Consulting would have offices in 8 countries within 2 years, with me overseeing the global strategy division. You realize what this means, Jennifer said as we left the lawyer's office. You're about to become one of the most influential business strategists in the world. I corrected. We're about to become influential. Ellie, you built this. I helped. But this success story belongs to you. That night, I hosted a small dinner party in my penthouse for the people who'd supported Ellie Morgan's journey. Jennifer, Sarah, who'd flown in from Denver, Caroline, and a few other colleagues who'd become genuine friends. People who knew me, valued me, and showed up when it mattered. To Ellie Morgan, Jennifer raised her glass, who proved that the best revenge is a life so successful it makes your past irrelevant. To chosen family, I countered, looking around the table at faces that had become more familiar and important than the ones I'd been born into. To people who notice you before you're worth noticing. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Sarah lingered behind. Can I ask you something? She said as we stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. Always. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your family had shown up to your graduation? I considered the question seriously. Honestly, I think I would have spent my whole life trying to earn their approval instead of building something that didn't need it. So you're grateful it happened the way it did? I'm grateful I learned early that their approval wasn't worth having. And I truly meant it. Sarah hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, Ellie. Not because you're successful, but because you became exactly who you were meant to be. After everyone left, I sat alone in my penthouse office working on a presentation for the World Economic Forum. Tomorrow, I'd be addressing global business leaders about the future of strategic consulting. Next month, I was keynoting a conference in Tokyo. Next year, Walsh and Morgan would likely be acquired by a major consulting firm for a sum that would make me one of the wealthiest self-made women in America. The life Ellie Morgan had built was beyond anything Ellie Patterson could have imagined sitting alone in that college parking lot 6 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your picture in Forbes. Very proud. Dad. I deleted it without responding. The girl who'd waited 22 years for those words was gone. Ellie Morgan didn't need pride from people who'd offered it too late, and for all the wrong reasons. I finished my presentation, poured myself a final glass of wine, and stepped onto my terrace. The Manhattan skyline sparkled below, each light representing someone pursuing their own version of success and significance. Somewhere out there, other young women were sitting in parking lots, wondering why they weren't worth their family's time. Somewhere, other daughters were learning to be invisible in their own homes. Somewhere, other girls were accepting that they were good at taking care of themselves because no one else cared enough to try. I'd started a scholarship fund in Ellie Morgan's name for first-generation college students from families that couldn't or wouldn't support their education. I'd spoken at women's business conferences about building success without traditional support systems. I'd hired young women who reminded me of my younger self and made sure they knew their contributions mattered. Ellie Morgan had become someone who noticed people who needed noticing. Someone who showed up when it mattered. Someone who proved that the family you choose could be more powerful than the one you're born into. The transformation was complete. The girl who'd been invisible had become impossible to ignore. The daughter who'd been forgotten had built a legacy that would be remembered long after the people who'd overlooked her were gone. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys of transformation and resilience. Remember that your worth isn't determined by who notices you. It's determined by what you build when you finally notice yourself. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is realizing you don't need the approval you've been chasing. Sometimes disappearing is the first step toward becoming visible. Ellie Morgan knew that now, and she'd never be invisible again.